9 million acres of forest, 1,700 miles of continuous shoreline, 4,300 lakes, 12,000 miles of streams, more than 300 waterfalls, 15 counties, 2 time zones, and 1 area code. Welcome to the Upper Peninsula. Welcome to 906 Outdoors. "906 Outdoors" is brought to you by Cooking Wild Seasonings. Make it fresh, make it yours. It was the perfect spring morning. Sunshine, no wind, quiet. Even the bugs seemed to leave us alone. The kind of morning you wish could start every day.
Yeah, that fish was not bedding. That's done spawning now.
I was back on the water with my good friend and fishing guide, Mike Mladenik. If you remember, Mike is where I got my start in the TV business. There's always a couple things I can count on when hopping in a boat with Mike. I always learn something new, and I've never been in a boat with them when the fish weren't biting.
Oh, we got off again.
Today we were after post-spawn smallmouth, and as usual, finding and catching them was not a problem.
That didn't take very long. Oh, yes. Light bite. Fooled him. He thought he was eating a crayfish, but instead he got my little wacky worm. We take fish like this all day long. Oh, yeah. Beautiful river smallmouth. Go back and get a bigger one. What they're doing is these fish are all completed spawning, and they're not very far from their spawning areas because they're feeding on crayfish. And this wacky worm, you see, it's kind of like a green pumpkin with some gold flecks in it. It might not look like a crayfish to you or me, but basically we're imitating a crayfish with these colors. And a lot of these light bites, it's not that the fish don't want to hit it. If you watch a smallmouth, when they attack crayfish, it's just a short little nip, 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 nip. You don't want to give the fish too much time because then they can swallow the bait, but you don't want to set that hook too quickly because then it just turns the fish right off. It's one thing nice about this river fishing. I don't need a big, expensive boat. You could do it in a canoe if you got a nice boat too. It's accessible to so many people. It's nice to catch those big giant fish in the Great Lakes, but a lot of people just don't have the boat for that kind of fishing. Showed you as I rigged up this wacky worm, the advantage to this O-ring, see how it slid back up the line with that fish. Now, if I would have hooked this directly through the worm, guess what? I'd have still caught that fish, but the worm would have broken in half and I'd be putting another worm on. You say, oh, what's a couple of worms? But you come on a day like on the river, you catch 20, 30 fish, you only go through 1 pack of worms instead of 3 or 4 packs of worms. And that could add up in a year's time. But just a wonderful thing. And again, I'm really a firm believer in the red hook. And to make it even more enticing, I even add the red O-ring. How can a self-respecting smallmouth pass that up?
Today's show is brought to you in part by Rapid River Knife Works, home of Michigan's largest custom knife factory showroom.
Today we're dealing with smallmouth. Spawning is completed, so we're looking at post-spawn fish. People say, well, so you get in a post-spawn, whether it's smallmouth, walleyes, or whatever, those are hard fish to catch. They're not easy fish to catch, but they're very catchable fish if you learn how to fish slow. Biggest problem most bass fishermen in particular have is they want to do everything fast. That's good when the fish are active and aggressive, but right now we're dealing with the post-spawn. I've been catching a lot of fish, but you gotta learn to fish slow. But then people say, ooh, they're biting real heavy, and that's a mistake that's made by a lot of fishermen. All of a sudden you catch 3, 4 fish, okay, I start speeding everything up. No, if anything, after you catch 3, 4 fish, I start slowing down because I just caught all the fish that are active right away. Sometimes you go into a spot, there might be 10 fish in there, bang, 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 you catch 3 or 4 right away, so that's good. But now I want to catch the 4 or 5 other ones that are in there feeding on all these crayfish. So what am I going to do? I slow myself down. Slower means more fish. I got him this time. Little fish, but that's okay. Not that small, but when you're used to catching 4 or 5 pounders here every day, it's... There we go. When you're getting a bite over here and you're watching them jump in front of you, like I said, I take this all day long. Oh, this is a dandy here. Might have to use the net on this one. We won't try to grab the line and bring that into the boat. Oh, yes. That old wacky worm that I'm telling you, get over here. Hard to beat it. That is a dandy smallmouth any place. That is a beautiful fish. Look at that, huh? Beautiful fish on a little wacky worm. Let him go back, and now we got to get a bigger one yet. I was starting to get a little bit edgy there. I had made about 10 casts without a fish. Come on up. There we go. This one doesn't want to come up. We're a little deeper water than we were before, but that... Beautiful. I like that. Jump right in the net for me. Let him go. He can go swim right back in the shade. Get in there, buddy. There. Ah, little guy. And again, look at that wacky worm. Goes up the line. Unhook the fish. I must have caught 10, 12 fish on this same worm. Oh, yes. Ooh, this is a nice fish. That's one thing when they hit these wacky worms, you don't know if it's a big fish or a small fish, a light bite, and this is a pretty good sized fish. Oh yeah, big wide fish. I like it. Might be the biggest one so far. I get him in. That's what we're looking for. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's a monster. Nice wacky worm. Did away that hook. Slides up the line and I can use it again. Beautiful fish. Everybody likes to catch fish, but let's face it, everybody likes to catch a big one. I always recommend to my clients, even if we're catching a ton of fish with a wacky worm, we always got at least one rod rigged up with a topwater bait. So a lot of times, you know, you get some of them soft bites, or even you see a boil and you know there's a fish there. Boom, you throw the topwater bait and you got a pretty high percentage chance to get it. And another thing is, sometimes it can go work both ways around. If I'm fishing with a topwater bait and I'm missing a lot of fish, then I throw the wacky worm there and I catch the fish too. So keeping that in mind, it's good to have a topwater bait and soft plastics very accessible to you at any given time. Oh, that's the part of topwater fishing that you just got to accept. You don't catch them all. Got that one. That don't happen a lot. I got lucky this time. Usually when they hit a topwater bait one time, that's it. If they miss it, he wanted that thing. And you know what? There's more crayfish coming out of that one's mouth too. Nothing like a smallmouth on a topwater bait. Especially a nice fish like this too. Oh yes. That makes the whole day. That's a beautiful fish. Topwater smallmouth. Don't get no better than that. That one hit that topwater bait right away. I love it. Oh yeah. Oh, that's a good fish. That is a good fish. Now you're never going to get this topwater bait out of my hands the rest of the day. I can see that. That's a pig. Topwater smallmouth. You know, there's been a lot of days on the water with a topwater bait. I might not catch the most fish of the day with a topwater bait, but a lot of days you catch the big fish of the day with a topwater bait. All you gotta do is get him into the boat. That's the problem. He's definitely the biggest one so far today. Oh, yes. That made my whole day for sure. You got to use your pliers with this. That is a nice fish anywhere. Topwater smallmouth.
.906 Outdoors is brought to you in part by Christ, your Northwoods neighborhood store.
You know, we're dealing with post-spawn smallmouth today, and let's face it, they're not real aggressive generally. They hit topwater baits, but you got to work it slow. Most guys have a bad habit when they fish topwater baits, fishing way too fast. See, I'm just popping it a little bit, let it stop, little pop, let it stop. When I'm popping it though, I want to get plenty of action. I don't want a little. I got that prop on here and it attracts them. And the other important thing is this particular bait, this little hubs chub I got, when I stop it, it's sitting vertically in the water. They're attracted to it. They see that drop. Sometimes I just itch it a little bit like that and then they come up and they hammer it. I've also got hair on here. And this is pretty important with smallmouth. Whenever you're using a topwater bait, whether it's just a popper or if it's a prop bait like this, should always have some feathers. Like this is red, that's my favorite color. Even white, yellow is good. But never use a topwater bait that doesn't have some sort of dressing on it too. This color here, probably my favorite, green pumpkin with gold flakes. This one, watermelon red. It's basically watermelon with red flakes. Beside working on the river here, I can catch bass with this color. I don't care if it's a clear lake, stained water lake, real dark water. Another color that works real good is if you're on any kind of stained water, whether it's a river or a reservoir, anything with copper in it. Drop it in the water, really shimmers, and people say, okay, why are these fish hitting that? That doesn't look like anything. Whenever you're using these type of baits, you're imitating a crayfish, whether you think so or not. Obviously, these do not look like a crayfish. You're throwing it tight to the shoreline. It's dropping very slow. And when a bass sees this, basically in their mind, they're assuming that that is a crayfish. But sometimes the more flake that you have in stained water, the better off you're going to be. If I'm fishing on a clear water lake, I might use something, I don't have any right here right now, but say just plain watermelon or plain green pumpkin without the flakes. So in clear water, you don't want the flakes, but in the stained water, you want to make sure you have these flakes. That was fast. Move the boat to a new spot and catch a fish right away. I like that. You might have to change color worms just to use something different because I'm sure I ain't losing them. Nice fish. I watched that fish come up and grab it, miss it. Now, I'm not saying for sure it was the same fish. It could have been another one. All I know is, whoa, quick release. And that's something. He hit that top water bait twice. He wouldn't commit to it and throw that wacky worm in there and got it right away. Crayfish coming up. The more I fish, I've been fishing for a long time, let's just say that. And I love it more every year. Things like this. Makes it all worthwhile. Nice little fish. That's another one up. Crayfish coming out of its mouth again. That's about the 5th fish. I've seen pieces of crayfish. We're dealing, these fish are in the post-spawn. They've already spawned out. And everybody thinks that after spawning, these smallmouth just take off, they go down to deep water. No, they don't, because they're spawning around these rocks. These rocks are loaded with crayfish. So they spawn, they go 3-4 feet, and they got breakfast already. Just a perfect situation. So there's no need to panic when you're in post-spawn. It could be the fantastic fishing. If you can find some areas where you have crayfish, the smallmouth are on the feed. There we go. Either that's a big fish or he's real spunky. Oh, I love it. Whoa! Gotta love it. Ooh, that's a dandy. That's a beauty. There's one behind it too. Hard to see in this stained river water, but there was another fish behind it. Probably a bigger one. Sometimes I think it's that red hook too. I talk about red hooks all the time. It's like people ask me, do red hooks really work? I said, I can't guarantee they work, but I think it sometimes gives you that little edge. You know, after all, we're trying to mimic a crayfish with this, and crayfish usually have little red spots on it, so it's good advice whether you're fishing for even panfish, use a red hook. That's another thing they do after spawning is complete. A lot of these bigger bass, they find wood and they hang real tight to wood. Even if they're not feeding, they're not far from their actual spawning areas, but they're just hanging tight in the wood. Well, crayfish come out of his mouth again. Look at them all. Holy cow! That fish was hiding in that wood because his belly was full. Oh, that one was underneath the pine tree. Another decent fish. I fooled him. He thought he was eating a crayfish and he's eating a wacky worm instead. Here, pal. These river fish are really pretty. You know, they got a little darker color to them. Little bars. Real pretty fish.
906 Outdoors is brought to you in part by Blades Bait and Tackle, your year-round connection to fishing Badenoch. When we think about fishing, we usually picture ourselves sitting in a boat, maybe even a canoe. In recent years, sport fishing from kayaks has become very popular. They're easy to transport, easy to launch, easy to manage on the water, and offer a stealthy means of sneaking up on easily spooked fish. While just about any kayak will do, you'll find a variety of boats designed specifically for the sport of fishing.
This is what you call a sit-on-top, which is, to me, the safest kayak there is. Drawback on them is probably the heavier of the kayaks that you want to drag around. But they use these on the oceans. They started out with this model, in fact, was designed by scuba divers. They put their tanks in the back and went out, and they're fairly easy to crawl in and out of. They can take a wave, and actually they have sculper holes, which the water can go right out. So it's like a floating dock out there. They're what you see on the ocean. It's the number one deal going. I love them. You can sit side saddle, feet dangling off the side. They're really a nice unit, no doubt about it. So what I do is try to keep as much quiet up front, trying to keep it as clean as I want, because you don't want your fly line getting wrapped around too much. Usually if I'm trolling, I'll use this setup right here. Otherwise I'll take it off and clear my front deck and just go without the rod holders to be a little easier on everything. Should have a paddle leash. They really come in handy. Most paddles all float nowadays, but it's so much easier if you do toss it off the side and you don't have to retrieve it too hard. But then they also have anchoring systems, which are really the only way to anchor up is with the trolley system is one of the safest ways. You can use a pole. A lot of guys will take a stick if you're in shallow water, about a 6-foot stick, and you can put it down into the muck, and it'll hold you pretty good. But the way of doing this is pretty much we use, there's different anchors systems, but I usually just use a down weight. Throw that over, and then what you do is you double up your line, come through the hole. That way you can anchor off the back of the kayak. You just pull your rope, and then you just tie off right here on a clip that I got. So that keeps you anchored to the rear. You can anchor off the front of the boat. You never really want to anchor off the side of a kayak because of the fact that if you took a wave, it could capsize you. Not so much in this kayak, but in a regular kayak. It's not safe to do. This way, if you're on a river or a flowage and you get pinned up someplace in fast water, all you do is untie your anchor. What I do is have a float on the other end. What you do is you just throw your float over, and what that'll do is just take your line right out, and you'll be, if I get this right, you'll be out of trouble, and you can paddle around and pick up your anchor at a different angle that way. So it's one of the safest rigs out there as far as anchoring up. And what I do is a lot of times, especially with the ball anchor, is if you're like bluegill fishing in shallow water or whatever, I usually give it a lot of rope. This is a pretty big size kayak, so a lot of times in a real windy day it'll drag it a little bit anyways, but if I want to move down a shoreline, I just pull her in 6-8 feet and then just drift down the shoreline, so you never really have to pick your anchor up out of the water, which makes it pretty easy that way. Saves you a lot of time monkeying and picking up and moving. Of course, they got some really nice seats in these kayaks. These are actually sit up above. This model is actually made to stand in. A lot of guys do stand up in them. It's a little wider model. You can put downriggers on these, which will really stabilize it out. I do that once in a while. If you're going to have any type of kayak, make sure you have a life vest that's made for a kayak. Because the biggest thing is, once you're in a seat, and if you got the full-bodied ones like the other style, you got a hump back, and it kills you. Being a muskie and pike fisherman, you need something to grab some of those toothy critters, and I'm not going to haul around a big net. So the grabbers are one of the best things. There are some that have a scale integrated on there. It's a lot easier on the hands. Put a float on in case it goes overboard. You can always retrieve it. Then of course you need your jaw spreaders, big and a good pair of pliers or tongs to get the hooks out. They make all different kinds of bags. This is a cooler bag actually. You can put lunch in there or whatever. You tend to carry a lot of my different fly boxes and whatnot in there. And you always got a little bit of extra room for your suntan oils and whatnot, bug spray. Got to have that. And it does carry quite a few rods, so it's a handy outfit. Guys make up their crates too that work fine. If you're out in bigger water, you might want to think about buying a rudder. It is a more expensive aftermarket piece that you can get, which are controlled by your foot levers then. But it keeps you in a straight line in a real windy situation. But most lakes you can get by without it up here pretty well. These work just as well in streams or lake. They get through everything, so pretty nice little unit there.
Thanks for watching, and we invite you to join us next week for another adventure right here on 906 Outdoors.